I know what you're thinking. Great. Another YouTube / vlogger / photographer combining all of them into one because there aren't enough of those on YouTube already. But no, that's not me, for I am not really a very good photographer, and as it turns out, I'm a terrible vlogger, as you will see from the upcoming evidence. I guess I shall call this channel How Not to Photography, and I guess this is episode 1, perhaps the only episode, but it takes place in Cornwall, which I'm not currently in. We drove down to a place called Sennen, which I've been to many times, and we were walking across the cliffs to a place called Llangyssil. And between Sennen and Llangyssil lies a little place called Land's End. At Land's End, there was a couple of things that I wanted to photograph, namely the RMS Malheim, which is a ship, and also an arch in the middle of the sea called Dodds Enman or something. Anyway, as I shielded myself from the sun beneath my raincoat, even though it was 17 or 18 degrees outside, and I'd forgotten to put sun cream on because I'm a mongrel, it was a very nice walk. Here are photos that I took. Okay, here's the first photo. This photo is good. The RMS Malheim peeks out between two cliff things, headlands. The texture in the grass is really nice and the colours pop really nicely, especially that lovely blue Cornish sea. Obviously the small elephant in the room here is that there is less of the RMS Malheim in my picture as there is in the previous stock image I just showed. I wonder why. It was the sea. Originally, I was a little put out when I first saw this location because I personally wanted to get above the RMS Malheim and I wanted it to be the subject of my photo, but in this photo, it kind of felt like it was the cliffs that were the subject with the ship being more of a background, like texture thing, colour thing, which wasn't really what I was after. So in order to get the photo that I wanted, I had to come off the path and climb onto the left-hand side cliff, which quite dodgy because those cliffs are really not very stable and they're very easy to slip off. Lots of people have done, I think. That seems right. But I didn't die, which is a good thing, probably. And I managed to get the shot. So this is the portrait shot that I got. And this shot was the shot I had in my head, which is always a nice feeling to be able to capture a shot that's in your head and look in the back of the camera and go, yes, that's what I was after. The RMS Malheim, the ship, big ass ship, center frame with the water breaking kind of around it. Couldn't do a long exposure, but that's okay. I actually think it looks better without it being a long exposure. But it turned out pretty nice, and the colours are popping, and the textures are vibing, and that's what we wanted. So yeah. Fun fact, the RMS Malheim crashed because, and this is according to the reputable news source that is Wikipedia, the first officer who was on watch at the time got his trousers caught in a lever, which made him fall over. He then hit his head, that rendered him unconscious, and by the time he regained consciousness, the ship was already on a collision course with the bay and they couldn't do anything about it. I mean, I thought he just fell asleep. I guess there's a lesson to be learned here. Maybe. Of course, I'd only chosen to shoot 2 subjects this day, the ship and the big arch in the ocean, but obviously the coastline itself, pretty spectacular. So I snapped this shot of the Land's End coastline. It's pretty nice, at least I think so. The flowers in the foreground combined with the sea, that washed out long exposure texture with the long ship's lighthouse in the background. Very simple, very straightforward. If you have a camera and an ND filter, you can do this shot. It's pretty easy. Eventually, the arch started to loom into view. It was about as impressive as an arch looming into view can be, and I snapped these photos. However, this one is my favourite, the arch centre frame with the white water crashing around it. Except not really crashing because of the long exposure, but you get what I mean. The colour of the rock combined with the texture of the water and the colour of the water make for a really nice juxtaposition. I'm also incredibly impressed and surprised at how still the birds on top of the arch stayed, considering this shot was like a 20-second exposure and the birds are kind of all still in focus. They don't have motion blur on them, so I don't know what they ate for their breakfast, but I would not be standing still on top of that arch if I was them. I also shot this shot whilst we were being English and drinking tea. This was our view towards Nanjizol. I thought the coastline provided a nice leading line to the subject that is the house. Although, to be honest, I don't think this photo is particularly good, so we'll move on. With hot. Fucking hell, that's hot. Ah. Now that I have you hooked with this high stakes, high adrenaline, high production value video, it's time to move on to day 2. Day 2 started with breakfast, and like this video, it was about as exciting as watching tourists take photos of pigeons in London. Anyway, after breakfast, and after I've applied my daily skincare routine, it was time to take on the world again. The plan was to walk from our little cottage down to a place called the Crown Mines, which are near Cape Cornwall. In order to get to the Crown Mines, we'd have to walk along the path known as the Tinner's Way, a path that goes back to when the tin mines used to be operational and stretches from St Ives down to Land's End. On this path I would encounter loose rocks, dirt, hay fever, and worst of all, no phone signal. However, through grit and steely determination, we made it to the Crown Mines, which were on my list of things I wanted to photograph that week. So without further ado, let's jump into the photos. This is the first photo. It's okay. The colours are nice, textures are nice, of course that's going to be nice. The composition, however, is lacking. Whilst there is good separation between the foreground and the background, there's nothing really that leads the eye to the mines. It's a little bit meh. So to fix the issue, I changed locations. I walked about 5 meters further down the mine, and of course nearer the cliff edge, because that's apparently what I do now. I'm a maverick. After relocating, I snapped this pic, which to me is much stronger. Obviously, the colours, the textures, blah blah blah, all good, yada yada yada, we know the drill. However, the composition is stronger. The mines now sit between the 2 cliffs in the foreground, and the rock in the middle of the pictures now leads the eye towards the mines in the background, rather than just being there for whatever. I did think, however, it would be better to also do a shot that focuses more on the mines. So here's a close-up of the mines. This shot is postcard gold. I can see this at every small kiosk in Cornwall, and a couple of the bigger ones, maybe. Anyway, with the Crown Mines being ticked off my list, I made my way back to the cottage. I didn't want to carry my tripod for the rest of the 3 miles that remained, because I'm lazy. So my plan was to go back to the cottage, take the car, drive to Cape Cornwall, meet up with my parents who were walking the rest of the way there, and then take some more random photos of Cape Cornwall. On my walk back, I thought I found an opportunity to take a photo of the Pendeen Lighthouse from Levant Mines. I wanted to try and frame the lighthouse just above the path leading through the mines, which is the aforementioned Tinner's Way. But to be honest, this photo is more like a badly executed good idea, so we'll move on. As I drove to Cape Cornwall and wondered how as a 23-year-old I was still on holiday with my parents, I suddenly remembered I needed to think of something to shoot. Luckily, Cape Cornwall has 3 discernible features: a boat ramp, some really cool rock formations, and then these 2 random rocks in the middle of the ocean called the Brisms. I decided that I'd do 2 shots at Cape Cornwall. A landscape of Priest Cove with the Brisms in the distance and the cool rocks in the foreground, and also a picture of the boat ramps with the quintessentially Cornish fishing boats on them. This is the first of those 2 shots. This is Priest Cove with the Brisms in the distance. This shot I think is one of my best from the week. The dark blacks of the rock in the foreground with the kind of matching blue of the sky and the sea, with the Brisms off in the distance and the cliffs to the right, make for a very nice composition in my opinion. It also helps that the clouds and the sea appear to be moving the same direction, helping to give the picture a healthy dose of movement. The only negative of this photo I'd say is that it's perhaps a little bit underexposed, but there's nothing you can't fix in post. Sort of. This is the second of the 2 photos from Cape Cornwall. This is the boat ramp. I was pleasantly surprised with this photo. I'm not typically particularly good at taking photos like this, so it was nice to take these home and in the edit see that actually it was an okay picture. I did have to edit out 2 people that were very selfishly swimming at the end of the boat ramp, but thanks to AI generative fill, I can take out whatever I want so that it doesn't really represent reality anymore. In all seriousness though, this picture is actually alright. The boats in the foreground make for a nice pop of colour, and the ramp disappearing into the water leads your eye through the photo.
But Tilly, I thought you said this was a vlog. So far, all that's happened is you've narrated over everything in a monotone voice. Well, people, I'm excited to announce that for the first time, we can go to Tilly on location to see what she has to say. So without any more hesitation, I present Tilly on location.
It's very, very sunny, but we're at a different location. I can't actually remember what this cove is called. Let me take you through the equipment I brought with me. This is my camera. This is a Canon RP. And then on the front, I've got the 24 to 105 lens, which is actually just the kit lens. I find it really versatile because 24 is pretty wide and 105 is like a nice zoom, so it covers a lot of bases. Because I'm doing long exposures, I've got my ND filter. It's 10 stops, but even in this sunlight, it's so bright that I'm having to do like a 50 ISO, and then like I'm stopping down to like f20, f22, because it's so bright. Anyway, that's kind of the vibe. I've shot this side, and then there's also like a little cove the other side. Those are the Brisms, by the way. But yeah, we're just chilling, just vibing. No signal, of course, because it's Cornwall. So yeah, I'll input some of the shots I've taken here. I think they're quite nice. There's not too much of a subject, it's more just like coastline, which is fine, but not ideal. I think my other photos have had kind of like a subject or something for me to like focus the image around, but there isn't really that here. And I think because it's high tide as well, there's less sort of interesting features. But that's fine, it's part of it. It's still interesting. Yeah.
Okay, after that abysmal attempt to explain what equipment I'd brought with me, in which I'd forgotten to list 2 lenses and 2 other cameras I'd bought, an 80 to 200mm and a 50mm, a film camera, which I won't show any of the pictures of because they're all absolute garbage, and a little digital point and shoot camera that I use just for fun. Anyway, now that that mess is out of the way, let's talk about the final photo of day 2. A photo of Porth Nanvan. This photo is particularly average, and that's pretty much all I have to say about it. Well, it's day 3, which means by now you know the drill. Expect disappointment, and then be even more disappointed than you expected to be. As I got into my newfound vlogging spirit and decided to film us filling up with petrol, and then film myself in the mirror, it was off to Porth 11 for the first stop of day 3. And for the first time, I hadn't prepared a subject to shoot. I've been to Porth 11 many times in my life, but when Porth 11's photographed by other people, it looks more like this. Either there's ridiculously pretty sunsets or ridiculously pretty storms. Either way, there's some form of weather event happening that is part of the intrigue of the photo, rather than just Porth 11 itself. However, today, the weather looked like this. Meaning, for once, I'd actually have to put in some effort in photographing something rather than letting a subject do it for me. After sitting on the beach for half an hour trying to figure out how to be a photographer, I eventually decided to go on a walk around the harbour to see if I could get some inspiration. And as it turned out, I did. Here's the first of only 3 photos I took that day. This photo is actually surprisingly good. I genuinely thought after I saw this on the back of my camera that the day was a complete write-off and that I was just going to be sulking and miserable. But when I got back to the edit, I saw actually all was not lost. Originally this photo didn't have the birds, and I was sat on the harbour wall thinking to myself, this isn't a particularly interesting subject. And at that moment, the Lord Almighty must have heard me, and a flock of birds proceeded to fly into the water to save my photograph. Or someone could have just tossed a bit of food, I don't really know. Either way, we ended up with this picture. I particularly like in this picture the colours, the movement of the water, the way the birds kind of have a little bit of motion blur on them, and the way the crescent-shaped houses lead your eye to the clock tower in the background. Anyway, after capturing this photo, it was time to relocate, and the next picture I had in my mind was the totally unoriginal shot of the clock tower with the coastline behind it. This picture is also a pleasant surprise. It has a painterly look to it. The subdued contrast, the anonymous people for scale, the colours and tones of the sea, and the coastline drifting off into the background all make for a lovely combination. Following these pictures with a completely unmotivated Tilly at the camera, because at the time I thought these pictures were a lot worse than they turned out, it was time to move on. Our final stop of day 3 was to a little place known as Kynance Cove. Once again, I'd been to this cove a lot, not really in recent years, so didn't really remember anything about how it looked, but I knew that other photographers liked it. And that all made sense when we got there and I saw how pretty it was. With my tiny mind trying to comprehend how the ocean makes these kinds of structures, it was time to think about what my next composition should be. Even though Kynance Cove is stunning, the sun was in a completely horrible position, shining straight down onto the ocean, meaning the reflection of the sun in the ocean was really harsh, and it was backlighting the headland, meaning that the detail in the rocks wasn't really there. However, I persevered and decided to take this panoramic, and to be honest, I'm really happy I did. I would say this photo is probably one of my favourites of the trip. It's Kynance Cove in its full Cornish glory. The blues of the sea, the structure of the land, the little cafe to give scale, all just works. I also just want to take a minute to talk about editing and show the before and after of this photo, because it's pretty insane to me that we can do this. And that's without even mentioning that this photo was a bunch of photos that Lightroom stitched together for me. As you can see from the before and after, it's quite a massive difference. The before photo, the raw photo, is garbage, to be honest with you. It's absolute rubbish. But somehow from that, we got the good photo. So all in all, I can't really complain. Anyway, with this photo, it concludes day 3 of our adventure. A strange day which at the time felt like a complete write-off and only later turned out to be, okay. Well, it's day 5 now, and I guess if you've made it this far into the video, then well done. I honestly feel like I should pay you for your patience. Anyway, I'm happy to say that we can go to On Location Tilly for an update. She's currently at Godrevy Lighthouse in St Ives. I'm at a place called Godrevy Lighthouse, which is located in St Ives Bay, and it's over there. That's St Ives over there, and I'm just walking back along the bay because I want to get the sand and these rocks that I'm walking across and the lighthouse in the distance. So it's like maybe a long exposure. Anyway, that's my plan. It's all good. Well, thanks for that, Tilly. Anyway, as I set up my first composition with the rocks in the foreground and the lighthouse in the background, I wondered if people sunbathing on the beach thought I was weird carrying 2 bags of camera equipment and wearing a raincoat in the middle of sunny June. Whilst I pondered these thoughts, I started shooting my photos. Well, because I'm not a very good photographer, I was only happy with one of the photos of the set of long exposures that I took. And here it is. Honestly, this photo's grown on me. When I first took it, I wasn't that pleased with it. I just don't think it's what I saw in my head. But actually, I quite like the yellow of the sand being a complementary tone to the blues of the sky. And the lighthouse of the distance isn't a bad touch, especially with the more sporadic layout of the rocks. I think for me though, I would have preferred the lighthouse to be more of the main subject rather than a distant background feature. But we'll see, perhaps it will continue to grow on me. Anyway, after wandering around the bay feeling disappointed and sorry for myself, I then decided that maybe a panoramic of the bay could help cheer me up. And was I right? Not really. But here it is anyway. Honestly, it's just an average panoramic. I do quite like the fact that there's the lighthouse, the bay, and then the rocks, all nicely separated from each other. But to be honest, St Ives is so far off in the distance that you can't really make it out, so it's hard to really place where this photo is. Well, after that, the weather took a turn and the rain started to set in, so we decided to drive home. To be honest, I thought that was it for day 5 and those were going to be my only photos, but as it turned out, that wasn't quite true. A few hours later, after listening to my mum talk to my brother on the phone about how bad England's football is,
but I don't know, surely, Joshua, if you were in the team, you would run like a little mosquito up and down that bed. You wouldn't stop.
the sun came back out and we decided to head down to Pendine Lighthouse to catch the evening light. I decided whilst I was there I'd take 2 photos, one looking back from Pendine Lighthouse along the coast, then I would walk down to the rocks by Portherris Beach and take a long exposure of the cove. Here's the first of those 2 shots. This shot is, okay. There's not too much of a composition, but to be honest, there's also not much of a subject other than the coastline itself, which is fine. At least the evening light brings out those lovely golden tones in the grass, and to be honest, this was probably the most turquoise sea I'd seen all week. At least it's nice on a personal note to have Giva Tim mine off in the distance. And here's the second shot. To be honest, this is much of the same story. Not much of a subject, so the composition is lacking slightly, but once again, those golden tones of the evening light and the blues of the sea really come through.